All right, so I'm doing a new series where I'm going to be building a T3 app from scratch using the latest version of Create T3 app. Um, for those who don't know what the T3 app is, it's basically just a buzzword for a certain type of stack that you can use to develop your web application. And it has next.js, TRPC, Tailwind, TypeScript, Prisma, and next.js. So I have some videos on my channel about this, which hopefully you guys are familiar with. But overall, I mean, we're just going to build something cool, hopefully in a couple of videos, in a series of videos, and we can maybe build something that is useful. So what I plan to build, I've been playing a lot of StarCraft 2 lately, and I've been trying to get better at it. I kind of suck at the game, but there's something about StarCraft 2 that you kind of have to get good at, and that is build orders. And what a build order is basically it dictates, depending on what race you're playing. So for example, I like playing Zerg, but I've been trying to play all of them so I can learn more about the different races. If you were to play Zerg and you are up against an opponent of DVT for Terran or something, this is a cool site that has like all user uploaded build orders. Some of them are from pros and some of them are just like random build orders that people upload, and you can vote on them and you can view them and you can see how difficult they're going to be for like a beginner to do. And the overall goal is you have like on the left, you have the supply. So basically throughout the game, you have to macro up and build drones or workers. And as your supply increases, also when you build like fighter units, your supply is going to increase. So typically a build order just dictates like, okay, when you have 13 workers, you need to build this thing, whether it's a unit or a structure. And then when you get to 16 supply, you have to build a hatchery. And then you kind of follow this build order and it puts you in a certain position, kind of like chess. You know how chess has different openings? And the better you are at the game, the more build orders you kind of memorize, and you can kind of scout your opponents and see like what build orders they're doing, which allows you to respond and kind of counter what they're doing. So that's what we're going to try to build, a site where you can kind of set up a build order and upload them, vote on them, rank them, etc. So for anyone out there who plays StarCraft 2, I hope you guys enjoy watching this little series. So first things first, let's make a repo. I'm going to call it sc2 build order. We'll just make this MIT. Go ahead and create the repository. And once I've created it, I'm going to go ahead and clone it. And in my workspace, so I'll go to my workspace, I will git clone, and I will clone that repo. And again, this is all from scratch. So like you're going to see me setting up an entire project from scratch, and we'll figure out how to do this together. So I'm going to cd into that directory. So now I'm in that directory right here. And I want to use the T3 or the Create T3 app library or package, whatever you want to call this, to basically set up a new project. I'm going to copy this line. And I haven't used this in a while, so hopefully it works perfectly. Last time I've used it like a couple months ago, it worked fine. Go ahead and run it. And I think it should basically create a fully set up Next.js application locally in this directory. I'll go ahead and just put a period here so it'll use this directory. We want next.auth, we want Prisma, we want Tailwind, we want TRPC. Let's just include all the goodies. And I'm going to say, no, don't make a new Git repo. Would you like us to run npm install? Yeah, sure, why not? Complaining that the directory is not already empty, I'm going to go ahead and say continue installation, overwrite any conflicting files. Yes. Give this a couple of seconds, it should finish. All right, so now it's set up. What I'm going to do is I do believe this is set up. Actually, I don't know what this is set up using, what type of database. I'm going to go ahead and open this directory in VS Code, and we're going to look at the code a little bit. Secondly, what we're going to do is I need to kind of get familiar with the .env file. So I actually want to use Postgres, so I'm going to copy a Postgres URL here, and then I also plan to use Docker Compose. So I'm going to go ahead and make a Docker Compose YAML file, and I'm going to cat a Docker Compose file over here so I can basically look at the contents. Just run it again real quick. And we're going to copy all this contents out and put it in the Docker Compose file. So the reason I'm using Docker is I don't want to install Postgres locally and get that running and make sure it's set up properly. Instead, I'm just going to defer to setting that up in a Docker file, which allows me to basically, if I have my Docker desktop running, I'll go ahead and run that real quick. I can basically run Docker Compose in my main directory, and that will spin up a database, and I can connect to that database. So going here, I'm going to go ahead and just say Docker compose up. Now Docker Compose is I think a brew package you can install, and you also need the Docker desktop running, I believe. It cannot set this up because I do believe it's already running. So I'm going to go to my other project and say Docker Compose down, and that'll kind of close it. And I'm going to go back to the StarCraft 2 builder, and I'm going to go ahead and say Docker Compose up, and that's going to spin up database. All right, so recap. We have the .env file pointing to that local Docker database. And if I do npm run dev inside of my next app, it should point to that on. And when I set up this E3 stack project, it is using Prisma. So one thing you need to do, let's look at the Prisma model real quick. And I don't know if we're going to need most of this stuff. Like we have example, account, session, user. I'll probably just keep all this stuff here. I'm going to change this to Postgres. And there's a comment when using PostgreSQL, uncommon DB text annotation. Text. I need to uncomment these for some reason. Don't really know, but I don't have the energy to look into it or find out. So at this point, hopefully we're good. I don't really know. I'm going to say npx prisma migrate dev. So this is a command you can use that basically runs through your Prisma file, which we had open a second ago. It's going to generate some migration scripts, and it's going to apply those to that locally running database. I'm just going to call it init because doesn't really matter, honestly. Okay, so now that we've set up our database and it should have the right tables, I'm just going to do a hard restart on the server just in case. I do believe Prisma has to like recreate the TypeScript types so you have access to them. Now let's go to localhost 3000 and make sure that we can actually access something. Looks good so far. I don't know. We're going to try to do the bare minimum in this first video of the series by basically just allowing a user to upload a build order. Maybe add a label or a tag to it. Okay, so as a user, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a to-do file. And I'm going to put out some user stories, is what we like to call them in the software engineering world, where every user story describes like a feature that your application needs to provide one of your users, right? So as a user, and then if you have different users, like as an admin or as a player, it depends. I'm going to say as a user because I think there's only going to be one type of user here. As a user, I shall be able to upload a StarCraft 2 build order text snippet. Okay, we're going to keep this as basic as possible, and then later on we're going to iterate upon it and make it better. So let's go to our Prisma file. Now, the first thing I want to do is I want to keep track of these build orders, right? So in the database, we're going to need a new table to keep track of the build order that's being uploaded so that we can later query on it and search for different build orders based on starting race or the matchup, basically. So if it's like ZVT, ZVZ, ZVP, you want to be able to query based on those criteria, I guess. I'm going to make a model, and hopefully if my memory serves correctly, it's pretty easy to do. I'm going to type in like a build order. And what this thing needs to have, I'm going to give it a unique ID. So just go ahead and copy that ID there. And what's something that we need to keep track of? I'm going to say the matchup. Now, I don't know what the convention is. I guess it's camel case. The matchup could be a string like that. And I do believe there's a way to use enums. I'd have to go Google and read the docs about that. But I'm going to keep it super basic for right now. And the matchup, these are where we're going to put like ZVZ, ZVT, ZVP, PVP, something like that. And then we also want the build, which could be a string as well. Now, usually when I save the file, it like auto formats this stuff. So I don't know if I'm missing an extension or something. Delete some of these comments. Don't really care about these. Anyway, let's just go ahead and run this. So I think, is this enough for a user? Remember, we're trying to satisfy the user story, right? Implement the least amount of code to make the acceptance criteria of your user stories passing. So in our case, we should be able to basically load up the app and upload a build order, create a new build order. We also probably want another one that says, as a user, I shall be able to view build orders based on matchup. Okay, there's 2 user stories. Maybe we'll get those done in this video and just kind of call it a day. I think that's a good enough starting point. So we updated the schema. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go over and I'm going to go ahead and run npx prisma migrate dev. That's going to see that we changed the schema file. It's going to ask us to create a new migration script. And so we needed to say adding build order model. Boom. And now we have a new migration script that's been applied to our database, gives us access to the model in our code. Now, I haven't talked about like how do you actually do any of this stuff in the code to actually like read and write to this table. But we're going to get there just in a second, so be patient. Okay, so going back to our app, let me just pin this so I don't forget where it is. And then I'm also gonna commit what we have, just because I mean we set up the project and we have a bunch of this like boilerplate stuff. I'm gonna say initial setup with build order model. Go ahead and add everything. Go ahead and commit. Go ahead and sync that up so that anyone else who comes to the repo can see the changes over time and see how this project has evolved. Again, going back to the first acceptance criteria, the first user story. As a user, I shall be able to upload a StarCraft 2 build order text snippet. Seems pretty straightforward. So how do we do this? Let's go to the public page here. Let's go to source, let's go to pages, and let's go to the main page. We're just going to add it right here. And again, I like to do the simplest thing first, and then later on we will refactor and clean it up, make it better, pull stuff into subcomponents, and all that good jazz. So let's just delete some of the stuff, I'll comment out the TRPC stuff because we might need to use that in a bit. But we need a page that basically allows users to upload a new build order. And what consists of a build order in this current state of the application? Well, we probably need like an input box. Okay. And then we probably need like a submit button. And then we probably, actually, let's make the input box a text area. And then we probably want to select, right? So you want to be able to do the matchup. And I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but bear with me. What we're going to do, we're going to add a label, and we'll say HTML4 equals select build. Actually, I'll call it match up select. Okay, it's always good to do proper accessible HTML. So I'm going to go ahead and on the select, I'm say ID match up select. And then inside of here, I'm going to say matchup. And let's go to the UI, make sure like we actually see something. And we do, we see matchup. It's very hard to read. I could give this like a text of white, maybe. So it kind of shows up. Looks a little bit better. And what we want to do is we want to be able to basically provide the different matchups that a user can select from. So again, that goes back to the different options. I'm going to just hard code these for right now. And I believe we can get these like ZVT, ZVP, ZVZ. And then we're going to do the same thing for starting with Protoss, ZVT, P, P. Make sure I set this up correctly. Okay, I have this wrong. So Zerg versus Terran, Zerg versus Protoss, Zerg versus Protoss versus Terran, Protoss versus Protoss versus Zerg. It should be Z. All right, and then finally we will do another one for Terran versus Terran. Terran versus Protoss, Terran versus Zerg. Go ahead and update these a little bit. Okay. And again, you could have this data driven. You could like make this be a React map, JavaScript map function and just have these all come from data. But this is super static and hard coded, right? These matchups are never going to change. It's always going to be you versus another type of StarCraft 2 race, right? So let's make sure that we have some options here. And now we do. We get some options that pop up. Looks pretty good. Well, actually, the styling looks absolutely horrible here, but again, let's just work on the functionality, then we can come back and maybe style it up, or maybe we can find an existing Tailwind CSS like component library to make this look really nice. I know there's one like Daisy UI we could try using. I know I talked about like not using it in the past, but I guess it's fine. Okay, so we got the matchup. And at the very least, we could just go ahead and give this like a gap of 4 so we can have some spacing between, you know, the header. This matchup should probably be called, actually I'm going to put an H1 here, and I'm going to say upload or submit a build order. Every page you should probably have an H1 just so that it's like accessible with a screen reader. So we're on the page submit a build order, and you have the ability to select the matchup. And what we could also do is in the text area, the user should be able to upload the build order here. So I'm going to go ahead and just put like a build order and bind that to some state that we haven't created yet. So over here, I'm going to say const build order and set build order equals use state. I'm going to set that equal to an empty string for right now and auto import that use state hook. And then on the text area itself, we want to listen to when a user types. So on change, we're going to say e, and then I'm going to say e.target.value to basically update that state when the user types. Now, I like to always double check that my stuff is set up correctly. So if you load up your DevTools and install the React component browser and just go ahead and like, I'm going to refresh the page and I'm going to type in something here. I'm typing, oh, it doesn't work. So I can't type. Oh, actually, I can type. It's just, it's in white. So let's just go to class name here and I'll give this a text of black so it actually shows up. And when you first start off with Tailwind CSS, it's always a pain because the styling is just super minimal. But as you start building out your subcomponents and your different reusable, widgets, stuff gets a little bit easier. I'll also add some padding to this. I'll say like padding 4, padding 2. How's that? So I should be able to inspect this page. And as I type, notice that my hook here is updating state. That's what we wanted to check. I wanted to make sure that as I type and as the user changes values, state is actually getting updated because we're going to need to send that over to the backend so we can persist the build order, right? And then we also have a submit button. I'll just say like class name is padding of 2, BG of white, text of black. How about that? Super ugly button. So we need to add validation at some point, but again, like we're going to keep this as simple as possible. Just implement the user story, and then we can come back and say like a user should be warned if they don't select a certain thing. Or the AC could basically say show an error if the build order input is empty, show an error if the matchup is not selected. So those are like business requirements. Like you can upload a build order snippet and you have to make sure that these things are actually like defined for your validation. Now I think I could just use plain old HTML validation here to make this as simple as possible. And I think I could just say like required, and then on this select, say required. Go. So now if I try to submit, in this case, I need to wrap this entire thing in a form, make this like proper HTML. I'm gonna go ahead and make a form here and make sure the button is inside of that so that when someone submits on submit, I'm gonna say handle up submit build order. We're gonna call a function called handle submit build order, which we haven't created yet. So I'll say function handle submit build order. And then that should get back a form event. I think it's called react.form event. And then I'll say e.prevent default so that the page doesn't refresh. And then at this point, it should be good. Like it shouldn't submit unless you actually fill in some certain things. So if you keep that blank, it's requiring that you actually select something. Now I may default this. So, okay, one thing we forgot to do was on the select box itself, like we don't have a value bound here and we don't know when it changes. So we definitely need to say like on change, and then we need to say E, and then we'll probably need to keep track of the matchup. So set matchup, keep track of that in state. And I'm going to start this at the first option possible, which is ZVT for right now. And I'm going to go ahead and just bind that to a value here. So I want the select box to match what the state is in React. And then we change it. I think you just say e.target.value maybe. I don't remember if it's on change or on select. Guess we'll find out, won't we? Let me try this. I'll just say set matchup and see what happens. I don't think this is actually what we want. What is E? Is E going to be a string? I don't know. I'll try that. I don't remember if it's on change or on select. Let's just try on change first and see what happens. So the idea is I should be able to select something and it should change. And I kind of visualize that here as I'm changing stuff. The state is updating. So I think this does work fine. But it's not rendering out because I think the text, again, white for some reason. So I'm going to say last name, color, text black. We'll keep the on change. All right, there you have it. Now the layout's all messed up. I don't know why the flex decided to change the direction because it has flex column here. Notice here it has flex column, and it's because I wrapped everything in a form. So whenever you change the nesting, you have to make sure that you kind of keep that. Now gap, I'll add it back. Gap 4. This could be a gap of 8. Put a space between those two. This is good enough, right? Again, my philosophy and what a lot of people in agile development believe is do the bare minimum to get the story working, to basically code the bare minimum to get the acceptance criteria written, right? So is this close enough? Probably. This is almost close enough to deploy to a real user and have them use. So the idea is they need to be able to select and just like upload a build order, right? I just don't care what they upload. I just want them to be able to upload a bunch of stuff. And we will redesign what the page will actually do at some point in the future. Okay, so it's kind of, I don't know why I can't expand right. Kind of weird, vertically locked. But regardless, we want to focus on like the actual submission. So when you click on the submit button, I want to take those 2 state variables that are stored in state here, so the matchup and the actual build order, and I want to send those over to the backend. But we don't have a backend endpoint to actually send anything over to, and we're also using tRPC, so things are a little bit different than how you might normally do it if you're using REST. So with the T3 stack, there is a server directory, and if you go into server tRPC, there's a router, and inside our router, they have like the main router here, which is merging all these subrouters together. We don't need example. We also don't need auth right now. I'm gonna leave them alone. Just change this little code for right now. I'm gonna add a new one called builds. Okay, I'll say build router. I'm gonna call it builds router. And we're gonna make a new router here called builds router.ts. And we're gonna copy the example and just do this. Okay. Now there's some new things with tRPC version 10 and the T3 stack. I don't know what public procedure is. It's probably like a non-authenticated endpoint or something. I don't know why. There's also protected procedure, which is basically a procedure that's using a middleware to make sure you're authorized. So that's pretty cool. So we want, for right now, we're wanting anyone to just upload this build order. We don't care about authorization, authentication. We don't want to have them actually log in. We're going to keep this super wide open for anyone to upload stuff. And then later on, we'll come in and add some authentication. So we have a builds router. And I want to make sure I auto import that and merge that into my main router. Now, this is all set, so we can close this file. But if you look at this, what are we trying to do again? Let's go back to the to-do. Remember, we have a to-do MD file. What are we trying to do? Well, as a user, I shall be able to upload a StarCraft 2 build order text snippet. So we want an endpoint or a tRPC router method, because tRPC doesn't use REST. It basically, you either create queries or mutations, and a mutation is what we want to allow someone to write to our backend, kind of do some type of action against our database in backend. So in our case, we're going to say builds router. I'm going to say create build or submit build. Don't really know which one I want to call it, but just name it something. And the cool thing about tRPC is that it has like validation and ZOD built in. So the route that we're hitting, I want to verify that they send over a matchup, and then I want to make this thing required. So I just get rid of the knowledge here. I probably should get rid of the knowledge there. And then I also want to make sure that the build order is defined as well, right? So remember in the front end, they have that text area. We want them to persist that to a database as well. Okay, so I'm going to change this to a mutation. And basically when someone were to do this request to our builds router submit build. I'm actually going to rename this to create build. We need to persist this, save to the database. Okay. Luckily, since we're using T3 stack, all this stuff is kind of like set up for us. And what we can actually do is we can, I believe, bring in the context. And then we say context prisma. And then we have access to build order. And then we can say create. Now I'm going to go ahead and pass in the data that we want to kind of send in, which in our case, we're just going to say input. I'm going to wait on this. And then I'm going to go ahead and just return the build that was created. Make sure I add async here. There. So it's saying build order and matchup string is not assignable to type something. I don't know why it's complaining. Build implicitly has a type any because it doesn't have type annotation. I don't know why this is complaining, but if we look at the Prisma schema, is there something we're missing? We're missing, it's called matchup and build. So I need to change this to build. There you have it. And luckily we're using TypeScript and it's yelling at us because we renamed this thing incorrectly. And our Prisma model expected it to be called something. Okay, so now we have a finished mutation that we can actually like send over data from the front end to persist these build orders. So going back to the index here, how do you actually send over that data? Well, we have to bring in that TRPC object, and I'm going to show you how you can access that mutation. I'm going to go ahead and say dot builds dot create build dot use mutation, just like that. And what we can do is basically use this method now, and I can send over that data that we're getting inside of the state here. Okay, so I can just go ahead and say create build order mutation, mutate. In our case, I guess we could mutate async. We might want to route to another page after they successfully uploaded. And then we're going to upload matchup and build like that. Now, because I called this build order in the front end and I named it build in the back end, it's a little bit confusing. So I'm going to rename this whole thing to just build to this. Just to make it a little bit consistent, we can kind of clean this up a little bit. Go ahead and wait on this, add an async there. So what this is going to do, it's actually going to create and submit that state over to the backend. And we should probably redirect the user to a new page when this is all done. Now, what we've come to at this point is this should probably live on its own page. I'm kind of regretting the decision of putting it on the index. This should probably live on a page called like create build or upload build or whatever. Let's go to pages here and let's just make a new file called create build.tsx. Remember, code is fluid. You can change it, you can refactor it, you can rename it. Don't get too caught up on like all the little nitty-gritty details. It doesn't matter too much. So what we're going to do is delete all the stuff that we're not using. And I will say create build, submit a build. I'll call it submit a build. I might rename this as submit build actually. Submit to build. Because that's what we call it everywhere else. Submit, submit, submit. It says it cannot find option. I don't know why it's complaining about options. Those are built into HTML. So it should be fine. Don't know what's going on there. But anyway, for the index, let's just go ahead and kind of change this up a little bit. I'm going to delete the form and just say welcome to StarCraft 2 build order manager. And we're going to add a link, right? I want to add a next link to go to a particular page or route. I'm going to go to the submit build route like that. So I'm going to say submit a new. So what this gives us is a link here. You click it, it takes us to that page. And now that page is isolated and just has the logic that's only necessary to submit a new build. Now let's make sure this thing actually works. If I were to submit this, it's actually just going to stay on that page. So I think I might actually want to bring in the router here. With next, I believe there's a router. You can say use router like that. Go ahead and auto import that. My auto importer would work. Okay, I don't know why it's not working. What's going on here? There we go. I'm clicking the wrong button. So after you successfully create the build, I'm going to say router.push, and I'm going to go back to the index. So if everything works perfectly fine, if this doesn't throw an exception, we should go back to the main page. So I'm gonna go ahead and just like copy this build order here, and I'm gonna go ahead and just paste it in, select ZVP, click submit, and it redirected us. So I think that works. I hope it works. One thing you can actually do to verify some of this stuff is you can load up MPX Prisma Studio. And at this point, I realize I'm going really fast. I took some pre-workout before I started making this video because I did a workout and I think it's still running through my veins, so I'm kind of hyped up. But anyway, I'm loading up Prisma Studio. You can access it on localhost 5555. And if you go to the build order table, you should see that build order that we just submitted. So now we actually have a way for users to upload real build orders to our database, and they can hopefully query it. I might wrap this video up soon. My dog is barking downstairs, so I might have to go let him out. But I think we're going to add another page just to basically display all the build orders, okay? Just so we kind of get full circle with the implementation. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new page called builds.tsx. And I'm going to copy over an existing page like this. And I'm going to delete a lot of the stuff just so we can kind of get something going. All right, go ahead and delete this stuff, delete this stuff. Now, what we want to do is close all these tabs because we have too many open. And now we're working on this user story. So as a user, I shall be able to view build orders based on a matchup. I'm just going to say just view build orders. I'm going to keep it even more simple, right? The smaller your user stories are, the better it is for your users because you can just get some functionality, ship it out there, and get it in front of people. So we want to basically, when this builds page loads, which first of all, I want to make sure this thing works. So I'm going to go ahead and go over to my app. I'm going to go to /builds. Okay, the page works fine. What we want to do is when this page loads, we want to fetch all the builds that exist in our data. Well, how do you do that? Well, remember we have that router called build router. I'm going to go here. I'm going to add a new query. So we haven't seen a query yet. We've only done a mutation. Query is the other approach you can do in TRPC to basically allow users to fetch data from your backend or wherever you might be storing that data. So I'm going to say git builds. This is going to be a public procedure. It's going to take no input, so I don't even need to do .input here, I don't think. But it is a query, so let's just go ahead and say query. This is going to be an async function, which is going to use the same like Prisma model that we used previously, but instead of doing a create here, we're going to say let me put context there so we have access to it. And I'm going to say find. Is it find? Find mini. I'm going to try this, see what happens. So we're going to find all the builds that exist in our database. This is not a long-term solution because if you have thousands of builds, you don't want to return thousands of builds to your front end. But again, I'm doing the most basic thing to get this stuff working. And I'm going to rename this home page to just builds page. How about that? So again, we haven't seen how do you query and fetch data from a TRPC query endpoint. Well, it's pretty straightforward. You basically just say const builds equal to trpc dot builds dot builds, and we're going to say use query, and then we're going to call it with absolutely nothing because it doesn't require any inputs. And now at this point, we should get back some data here. So we can use React and say builds dot data, and if data is defined like that, I'm going to go ahead and just map over it, and we are going to try to render out the builds here. So I'm going to just go ahead and do like an unordered list with some list items, and I'll say build ID. Actually, we could probably do a table. Whatever. I'm going to do a table instead. So let's just wrap this in a table. And then I'm going to say t-head, and then I'm going to say t-body. And inside of t-head, is it th, I think, and then like td? I don't remember, honestly. I have to go, or maybe it's th. This is a tr. th. This is going to be ID. This will be matchup, and this will be build. So just display it in a table for right now, just to kind of get something going. And then maybe in the next video of the series, we can make this all look nice and pretty. All right, so what are we messing up here? So I think this t-head is good. T-body. This thing needs to render out t-rows. And then inside of each T row, we have to print out the ID, the matchup, and then also the build. Okay, so let's save this. This is probably complaining because the key is not provided here. So let's just go ahead and give a React key so it's not complaining for us. And now what this should do is crash for some reason. There we go. So now we actually have the build displayed. So we have the ID here, we have the matchup, and the whole point of this was just basically go for full circle to make sure that we can upload some data and fetch that data back. And I'm going to go ahead and just add some links to make it a little bit easier for like users to navigate. I'm going to go ahead and just add a link here, a link like this. And I'm going to say, make this go back to the dashboard. Just say this, I'll say home. Auto import that. So now I can actually go back to home. There should be a button on the home page called like, I don't know, view builds. And that'll go to builds. Okay, so now I can go to view builds and go home. Let's submit a new build. Go ahead and type some random garbage. Click submit. Go to view builds. Now I think actually when we submit a new build, it should probably take you to the builds page. So I'm just going to go ahead and rename this from router.push of slash to router.push of builds. So now after we create a new build, it takes you to the actual builds page. So I apologize, I went really fast, and if I know this is a channel for beginners and I should be kind of going slow and walking you through everything I'm doing. But honestly, I just want to build something. I just want to build something fun, and just kind of coding without any limitations or throttling on like what I'm doing is just a lot more fun than explaining every single thing I do. So I apologize if you're kind of lost at this point. I know the styling of the entire app looks garbage, but I do plan of pulling in like an existing Tailwind CSS component library or something. I might try doing Daisy UI again just because it has like a bunch of stuff out of the box. And like it could make the links look nicer and stuff and the tables look nicer. But at this point, we've come full circle. Everything looks good. I'm going to go ahead and commit what I have. And I'm not going to deploy it to Vercel yet, but I do plan to deploy this to Vercel and actually set up like a planet scale database, or maybe I could set up a database on Railway, and we can have this all be live and we can kind of watch this be deployed along the way. So I'm gonna go ahead and just say like adding a builds page and submit build page. And the to-dos, I mean, we're done with those two. Super basic, but we're done. Go ahead and add those, commit them, and sync them up. All right, so now we're good. I'm gonna go ahead and just do a little bit of cleanup. We have like some functions that we are calling in the index that we don't even need anymore. We don't need that stuff. So I'll just go ahead and delete some of that stuff. That's called the home page. I like to rename this to like actual home page, like that. This one I should probably rename to submit build page. Is there anything else I can clean up here? Probably, but it's good enough. And this is called builds page, and I don't see any lint errors. So yeah, I think I'll just go ahead and commit that one as well. Clean up some lint issues and rename page components. There we go. Submit that, commit it, get up. So if you do want to kind of follow along, I do have this code hosted at this URL. I'll try to remember to put in the description. CodyCyber, or github.com/CodyCyber/starcraft2 build order, SC2 build order. Go through here. You can actually look through the commit history if you want to follow along as stuff is being added and features are being added and bugs are being fixed. You can kind of see my process of how I build up an actual web app. And I'm going to try to make sure I do these commits good. If I wanted to be serious about this, I do pull requests and I kind of like review them. Maybe I'll set up a CI/CD pipeline and do some testing as well. I highly doubt it because it always slows everything down, but I do argue that you should have tests over everything. So I might actually do that in this project. I don't know. Anyway, stay tuned for part 2 of the series. If you want to see this thing be built up and deployed and be fully functional and live, then stick around and stay tuned for the next videos in the series. Like always, have a good day. Happy coding.